Everybody, my name is David Roscoe, and today we are talking about this behemoth of a lens, this Canon RF 50mm 1.2 lens. To start out, I'm not gonna make you wait and watch this whole video. Here's a short of what I think about the RF 50mm 1.2 lens. It is big, it's heavy, it is not a nifty 50, and it is expensive at $2,300. However, I think that it's worth it because of the image quality, the razor sharpness at wide open at 1.2, and the overall color rendition of this lens. So let's jump into a little bit more detail about why I think that it's worth it. Let's start with just kind of the overall appearance and the size of this guy. It is huge. As you can see, it is not a small 50mm lens. It's definitely not a nifty 50 by any standard. In fact, I think that if you are going into it hoping that this is your nifty 50 that you're used to, maybe a 50-1.8, or something similar to that, I think you're going to be very disappointed. As I kind of was. When I first got this, it turned me off because of the huge size of it. Obviously, having the grip on the EOS R makes it feel better in my hand. However, without the grip, it's still usable, especially with the EOS R, because the grip is so good. It's better, at least in my opinion, than the Canon 5D Mark IV. It still is a huge lens, as you can see here. That kind of sums up the appearance of this guy. Build quality wise, it's pretty solid. I know that some people are not fans of the kind of plastic outer coating that the L lenses have. Personally, I love it. It's kind of like a tough plastic, but just know that you're not gonna get the metal barrel. If this was metal, it would be absolutely just huge and weigh so much more than what it actually does. So I think that that's actually welcome in this. It's weather sealed. So that pretty much does it for build quality and appearance. As a side note, I think that it looks great on the EOS R body. I just think that I love the form factor of this. Yes, again, it's not small, but at the same time, I think that this is, I just like how it looks on this camera body. Okay, so now let's get to the good stuff. So because I'm a hybrid shooter, meaning that I shoot both photo and video for weddings, for commercial work, it means that I use my gear in both situations, both for photo and for video. So all of my gear performs dual purposes for the most part because I can afford to have gear that does not. So I'm gonna be starting out with just the photo section of this to tell you what my opinion is about that in terms of photography and using it for still images, and then we'll get to the video second. All right, so first and foremost, the one thing that is my absolute priority with any lens is autofocus. Is it quick and is it accurate? So I'm gonna show you an example of in the shop with Yaz, and we're walking back and forth, testing out the autofocus with the IAF in servo, or AF continuous with this lens. So go ahead and check that out right now. All right, peeps, so I'm gonna do a quick autofocus test. I am using a EOS R right here, along with the RF 50mm, and I'm gonna use a Atomos Ninja to record that. So there is my model over there. So she's gonna kind of walk up and down and kind of show you guys a little bit of the autofocus and the IAF. Focus is locked on Yaz's eye. You can see that it's switched, and I tell her to just start slowly walking towards me. And you can see that it does a really good job of holding focus on the eye. The little box kind of is stuck there. There's a little lag in between when I capture a photo, but for the most part, it does a really good job. She goes out of frame, comes back, and immediately locks on. And then I have her walk backwards. And you can see that it still holds onto her eye. And even when she turns away, it does a really good job of keeping track on her face. So it grabs the eye even at the furthest distance, which is probably like 30 feet. And I have her walk a little bit faster, and it still does a really good job of holding. And then after she goes out of frame, it picks her back up as soon as she comes in, and then locks right back on her eye. So also, I probably should have upped the shutter speed, especially if she's going to move that fast, from 1/60th to maybe like 2/50th or 500th. But it still does a good job of tracking. You can see from side to side movements. And even when her face turns, you could tell that, like right there, that it holds. And then as soon as she comes back, it catches her eye again. Personally, I think that the lens performs really well. I don't think that it's the fastest lens that I've ever used. However, it's definitely fast enough for all of my wedding use cases. I'm a pretty quick shooter. I like to kind of get in, pull the camera up and rattle off a couple of shots and then move. And so I've not really had a want for better autofocus from this camera. With the RF system, it feels good. It's snappy. I tend to use single shot or AFS a majority of the time, but then we'll switch into servo with IAF for shots where a bride and a groom are walking towards me, or any time where somebody's walking towards me. That's typically when I will go to continuous or servo autofocus. There is one thing to note though, to be completely honest. This lens, the internal focusing element does move, and I'm not sure if that I can show you that, so let me go ahead and try that out right now. So as you can see, the internal focusing element does move and you can hear it. So I'm gonna show you guys what that sounds like using my lab mic right here. So here's what the internal focusing motor sounds like when you focus. It's not super loud, it's definitely something to note, and especially for video shooters, we'll get into that a little bit later. But it is just there, so be conscious of that. Next thing is image quality, and this is kind of where this lens shines. There has not been a better 50mm that I have used, and I don't say that lightly. The previous EF 50mm 1.2 was a great lens. It, however, was very soft, wide open at 1.2, which was disappointing because you get a Canon L prime at 1.2, you want to shoot it wide open. Yes, it does give a more dreamy quality when you shoot a 50 1.2 wide open. However, it's just kind of disappointing. I would rather have control about, okay, it's tack sharp, and then I can manipulate it being a little bit softer if I want to by dropping clarity or dropping sharpness. I'd rather be able to manipulate that in post and have the option of it being super sharp than the lens itself having the flaw of not being super sharp. At 1.2, this lens is incredibly sharp. And now I'm gonna get into a story about how I found that out. Initially, when I got the lens, I was turned off by the size. I was turned off by it not being the nifty 50 that I wanted. And I almost sent it back. I was kind of leaning towards that direction. However, I had a commercial shoot coming up, and I got the chance to use this lens with my gear on this shoot. And it wasn't until I got home that I reviewed the images and I saw this portrait setup that we had, this kind of interview setup that we had going on, where I took some still frames during that using silent shutter. And I saw just the tack sharpness at wide open at 1.2 on the eyes of the subjects. And I was amazed. I was blown away by how razor sharp that it was. Not only that, but the out of focus renderings, the bokeh that you can kind of see in these images is just so soft and pleasant to look at. There's some lenses that have the out of focus renderings that aren't as pleasant. This one is so buttery smooth, and I love it for that. I'm not a huge like bokeh maniac, but in this case, like how can you not love it? Another aspect that I look for in lenses that's kind of like a non-technical aspect is character of the lenses. Each lens tends to have its own kind of unique character that it produces, and that's a combination of the lens elements in it, the coatings, along with the imperfections that the lens may have. I don't really know that this lens has that many imperfections, except I'm not a super technical like MTF chart type of photographer. I don't really care about that kind of thing. For me, how does it perform in the real world? And my experience so far has been nothing but good with this lens. It inspires me to shoot with it, and that makes me shoot more with it. So that's more than I could ever ask for really in a lens. I'll go ahead and put up some examples of what I'm talking about in terms of character of this lens, and I hope that that gives you kind of a good idea in terms of flare, in terms of how sharp that it can actually be, and various different settings, maybe studio, outdoor. It's just a really versatile lens once you get past the size of it. Now that we've talked about the photo side of it, let's move over and talk about video, because I shoot video as well. So how does it perform during video? The number one thing that I think that people would be most concerned about with this lens is the autofocus motor and the fact that it does make noise when it focuses. I'm gonna go ahead and show you an example of what video sounds like when this lens is focusing using the onboard microphone. So this is the Canon EOS R with the RF 50mm 1.2 set at 1.2. I'm just gonna kind of move around a little bit and see how the focusing does, so that way you can see it. And then also too, this is a good point to bring up the internal focusing, and I'll switch to the audio on the camera to see if you can actually hear anything. Go back and forth. Clearly you can hear the lens. For me personally, this does not matter, because if I'm recording without a shotgun mic or without a lav mic, then I'm more than likely recording highlight clips or B-roll clips that I'm not gonna be using the sound of. I'm gonna be using high quality sound clips that I'm gonna be recording with a dedicated sound recorder more than likely. So for that kind of situation, it doesn't really apply to me. Other than that, I'll throw up a couple of wedding clips that I've shot using this lens just to kind of showcase what the capability of this lens is and what kind of image that it produces. I started my photography career with a single camera and one 50mm 1.4 lens. It is such a versatile focal length that you can shoot events with, you can shoot portraits with, you can shoot just about anything that you want, given that you're willing to move your feet around. And so to find a 50mm that is not the nifty 50, it's not tiny, and yes, that is a drawback, and this may be specialized because of that. However, I feel like it's good enough and the image quality is great enough to where it is worth using and it is worth purchasing. I hope that all this information helps you guys. If you have any other questions, feel free to drop them down in the comments, and otherwise, my name is David Orozco, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.